stupid plexiglass thingy.
My understanding, our inventory or expanded list at the end of the year is posted now?
Does seem that way.
Excellent. Now we'll just have to fill it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's goes all the way through December. And I think like there's no reason why we shouldn't have a first go through that goes all the way through December. And then if we can confirm everything, I don't see any reason why as soon as the Hagim are over in October we don't immediately start with
I
January.
don't see any reason either. I mean, it is literally a push of a button to make that list, so.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not much. I gotta do a little bit more refining to put in some of the fast activities.
Yeah. I am gonna go through, there are like a few things that I don't like about the triennial reading that I think we could and welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's in-person and live stream Shabbat morning service. My name is Rabbi Rafi Spitzer. You'll notice today that we have adapted some of the new protocols for our that have been recommended by our reopening task force. For example, on the stage right, on this side, the rabbi's stender side of the bima of the sanctuary, we now have the chairs set up as they used to be in the rows to accommodate more people. You're all welcome to come. Please do join us. You also can continue to access the live stream. On the left side and in the small social hall, we have the chairs continue to be set up at socially distanced patterns so that people can continue to distance if they choose. We have removed the plexiglass screens, so I now don't feel like there's something in between us, which I do appreciate. And we are going to be bringing Gabaim up onto the bima to make sure that our Torah reading is of the best quality that we possibly can achieve. As of right now, my understanding is that the Gabaim who are doing that have to have revealed their vaccination status to us and have to be vaccinated. In general, we're not asking people to reveal their vaccination status to us, and we're asking that everybody continue to wear masks in the sanctuary. But I am really excited about these changes. We will continue to take aliyot at the base of the bima for the time being. That way we do not have to ask anybody who's taking an aliyah whether they have a vaccination status or anything like that. And I think that this is a step in the right direction that I think is really wonderful for us in terms of our capacity for reopening. And I look forward to greater in-person attendance as we continue to feel more and more comfortable with coming back out into the world. We'll begin. We are still in our shortened 9:45 start time. The ritual committee will also take that up for consideration, and so we will begin our service this morning. Steve is leading us in Shachrit with Baruch She'amar, page 54. Please rise.
Baruch She'amar v'haya ha'olam Baruch Hu Baruch Oseh Bereshit Baruch Omer Ve'oseh Baruch Gozer U'Mekayim Baruch Merachem al Ha'aretz Baruch Merachem al Habriot Baruch Meshalem Sachar Tov L'Re'ahav Baruch Chai La'ad V'Kayam La'netzach Baruch Podeh U'Matzil Baruch Shemo Baruch Adonai Melech Haolam. Yachid Chei Ha'olamim Melech Meshubah U'Mefo'ar Arei Ad Shmo HaGadol Baruch Atah Adonai Melech Mechulahal Batishbachot.
You may be seated as we continue with Nishmat, page 334.
Nishmat Kol Chai Torech Et Shimcha Adonai Eloheinu V'ruch Basar.
You want to see it, right?
נהללך ונשבחך ונפארך נברך את שם קודשך כאמור לדוד ברכי נפשי את אדוני וכל קרבה את שם קודשו האל בתעצומות עוזך הגדול בגבוהות שמך הגיבור לנצח והנורא בנורותיך המלך היושב על כיסא רם ונישא שוכן עד מרום וקדוש שמו וכתוב רנו צדיקים באדוני לישרים נאווה תהילה בפיו שרים תתהלל ובדברי צדיקים תתברך ובלשון חסדים תתרומם ובקרב קדושים תתקדש ומחלות רבבות עמך בית ישראל רינה יתפאר שמך מלכנו בכל דור ודור שכן חובת כל היצורים לפניך אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו להודות להלל לשבח לפאר לרומם להדר ולברך להעלה ולקלס על כל דברי שירות ותשבחות דוד בן ישי עבדך משיחך.
Please rise, page 338 for Yishtabach.
ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו האל המלך הגדול הקדוש בשמיים ובארץ כי לך נענו אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו שירו שבחה הלל וזמרה עוז וממשלה נצח גדולה וגבורה תהילה ותפארת קדושה ומלכות ברכות והודאות מעתה ועד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני אל מלך גדול בתשבחות אל ההודעות אדון הנפלאות הבוחר בשירי זמרה מלך מלכי העולמים. Still down one.
Okay, we continue with the blessings before Kriyat Shema, page 340 in the middle of the page. You may be seated.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or uvorei choshech osei shalom uvorei et hakol hakol yoducha hakol yishmecha hakol yomru ein kadosh Adonai. אין כערכך אדוני אלוהינו בעולם הזה, ואין זולתך מלכנו לחיי העולם הבא, אפס בלתך גואלנו לימות המשיח, ואין דומה לך מושיענו לתחיית המתים. אל אדון על כל המעשים ברוך ומבורך בפי כל נשמה גדולו וטובו מלא עולם דעת ותבונה סובבים אותו המתגאה על חיות הקודש ונדר בכבוד על המלחמה זכות ומישור לפני כיסו חסד ורחמים לפני כבודו טובים מאורות שברא אלוהינו יצרם בדעת בבינה להשגל כוח וגבורה נתן להם להיות מושלים בקרב תבל מלאים זיו ומפיקים נוגה נאה זיוון בכל העולם שמחים בצאתם וששים בבואם עושים מהם הרצון קונם פאר וכבוד נותנים לשמו עלה ורינה לזכר מלכותו קרא לשמש ויזרח אורה והתקין צורת הלבנה Shevach nonim lo, kol tzeva marom tiferet ugedula, shrafim ve'ofanim ve'chayot hakodesh. Le'el asher shavad mikol ha'ma'asihim b'yom hashvi. Titbarak Moshienu el shevach ma'aseh yadecha ve'al me'orei or she'asita yafaruhu chasela. Titbarak tzurenu malkinu ve'go'aleinu borei kadoshim.
Page 344.
Kulam mahovim, kulam burim, kulam giborim, ve'kulam osim, be'ema yitzar etzon konaham, ve'kulam podchim et pichem b'kedusha u'b'tohora, v'shira u'b'zimra, u'marchim u'meshabchim u'mefa'arim u'ma'aritzihim, u'mahakdishim u'mahamlichim. Et Shem ha'el ha'melech ha'gadol ha'gibor ha'kadoshu. Ve'chulam mekablim alehem ol malchut shemayim zemizeh v'nonim reshut zelazeh lehakdish liyotzram benachad ruach besafa v'rura uvini maha kedosha kulam kechad onim ve'omrim be'yirah Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzivot, Melech haaretz kivodo. Ve'ha'ofanim ve'chayot hakodesh, ve'ra'ash gadol mitnasim, le'umat tzrafim, le'umat meshabchim ve'omrim.
Baruch kevod Adonai minkomo.
Le'el Baruch ne'imot yitenu. Or chadash al Zion ta'ir, or chadash al Zion ta'ir. Or chadash al Zion ta'ir, or chadash al Zion ta'ir. V'nizke kulanu mehera le'oro. V'nizke kulanu mehera le'oro. Baruch atah Adonai Yotzer HaMeorot.
Page 346.
Ahava Rabbav Tanu Adonai Eloheinu Chemla Gdola V'Tera Hamlata Aleinu Avinu Malkeinu Ba'avur Avoteinu Shebatu V'cha Avinu Malkeinu V'telamdem chukei chaim Ken techonenu tlamdenu Avinu ha'av ha'rachaman Hamrachem rachem aleinu V'ten le'libeinu lehavin L'haskil lishmoa Lilmodu le'lamed Lishmor ve'lasot Ul'kayem et kol divrei Talmud Toratecha v'yava V'ha'ereninu b'toratecha V'dabek lebeinu b'mitzvotecha ויחד לבבינו באהבה וביראה את שמך ולא נבוש לעולם ועד ולא נבוש לעולם ועד כי היא בשם קודשך הגדול והנורא בתרבות נגילה ונשמחה בשועתך והביאנו לשלום מארבע כנפות הארץ ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו כי אל פועל ישועתה ובנו בחרת מכל עם ולשון וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול סלע סלע באמת להודות לך ויחדך באהבה ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר במו ישראל באהבה
אל מלך נאמן שמע
ישראל
אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם להודע ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך והיה אם שמעתי Adonai Elohechem emet emet v'yatziv v'nachon v'kayam לדור ודור הוא קיים ושמו קיים וכיסו נכון ומלכותו ואמונתו לעד קיימת ודבריו חיים וקיימים נאמנים לעד עולמי עולמים על בתינו אמת שאתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו מלכנו מלך אבותינו גואלנו גואל אבותינו יוצרנו צור ישועתנו פודנו ומצילנו מעולם שמך Ein Elohim zulatecha.
Ezra Tavotenu Atahu
Me'olam. Tehilot le'elyon Baruch Hu Mevorach Moshe uvnei Israel echanu shiraha b'simcha rabah ve'amru chulam mi chamocha b'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedar kodesh nora tehilot osef Shira Chadasha Shibchu Geulim L'Shimcha Al Sfat Hayam Yachad Kulam Hodu V'him Lichu Ve'amru Adonai Yimloch Le'olam.
Please rise. Page 352 for Tzur Yisrael. Following Tzur Yisrael, we will join together with Steve for the Amidah for Shabbat morning, which can be found on page 354. Following the Kiddusha on page 356, we will continue with the individual whispered Amidah until the close of the Amidah on page 364, 365. I'm going to ask that everybody standing out in the hall come in so that we have a minyan.
We have 10 anyway. RBC 11.
Thank you. Tzur Yisrael, page 352.
Tzur Yisrael, Kuma Bezrat Yisrael, Uvdechinu Mecha, Yehuda V'Yisrael, Go Aleinu Adonai Tzevaot Shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch Atah Adonai, Kahal Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avoteinu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor V'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei Hakol, V'zocher Chastei Avot, Umevi Goel Livnei Bneihem, Leman Shemo B'Ahava, Melech Ozer Ufokedu Moshia Umagim, Baruch atah Magid Abraham Ufoked Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayim Eitim Atarav Lehoshia, Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed, Mechayim Eitim Berachamim Rabim, Somek Noflim Berofei Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayim Emunato, Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Kivurot, Umido Melach, Melech Mimit Umechaye, Umachniach Yeshua, V'ne'eman atah l'hachayot meitim, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayeh ha'meitim. Nekadesh Shimcha Ba'olam Kashem Shemakdishim Oto Bishmei Marom Kakatuv Al Yad Neviecha Vekara Ze'el Ze Ve'ahamar Kadosh 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 Adonai Tzvaot Melech Haaretz Kevodo Kivas Bekol Rash Gadol Adir V'Chazak Mashmihim Kol Midnasim L'Matzrafim Leumatam Baruch Yomeru Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimkom Malkeinu Malkeinu Tofia V'timloch Aleinu Ki mechakim anachnu lach Mimkomcha malkeinu Malkeinu tofia V'timloch Aleinu Ki mechakim anachnu lach Matai Timloch Betzion Matai Timloch Betzion Bekarov beyamenu leolam ba'ed tishkon Bekarov beyamenu leolam ba'ed tishkon Tit gadal v'tit kadash v'tok Yerushalayim ircha L'dor v'ador u'netzach v'lenetzach netzachim V'einenu tirena malchutecha Kadavar hamur b'shirei uzecha Ayedei David Mashiach tzidkecha Imloch Adonai le'olam Elohai Tzion L'dor v'ador Hallelujah L'dor v'ador Nagid Godlecha U'lenetzach netzachim Kedushatcha Nakdihi Sheshivchacha Eloheinu mipinu le'mush le'olam ba'ed Ki Melech Gadol v'kadosh Ata Baruch Ata Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh
Yismach Moshe. If you haven't completed your individual whispered Amidah, please continue davening. We join together on page 392 for Kaddish Shalem, page 392.
יקרא ויקרא שמי רבה, ועמד יברכרותיה, וימליך מלכותיה, וחייכון ובימיכון, וחיי לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה בזמן קריב וימרו, אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם יתברך. יתברך וישבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו לעילא מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא וימרו אמן תרמות סוד הון ובעת דכל יזרוק אדם ובהון דבישמיא וימרו אמן יהי שלום הרב מן שמיא וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל וימרו אמן עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imaru. Amen.
We turn back to page 32 for the Psalm for Shabbat, page 32.
Hayom Yom Shabbat Kodesh Shibu Hayolavim Omrim Beveit Hamikdash Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat Tov Ladol Lalas Mershim Chal Yom Lagiba Bakrastecha Menachal Balot Alas Tzadi Katmar Yifra Ke'eres Balvanon Yiskesh Shulim Beveit Adonai V'chatzrot Eloheinu Yifrichu Oh, Yinavun B'Seva D'Shenim V'Ra'ananim Yiyuhu Lehagid Ki Ashar Adonai Tzuri V'Lo Avlata Bo
Kaddish Avelim, Mourner's Kaddish, page 52. Yitgadal V'Yitkadash Shemei Rabbah Ve'alma Divra Kirutei Ve'amlich Malchutei V'chayechon U'vyomechon U'v'chayei D'chol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala U'vizman Kariv V'imru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'alam Alamei Almaya Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam V'yitnasei V'yitadar V'yitale V'yitalal Shmei D'Kudesha B'richu Le'ela Min Kol Birchata V'shirata Tushbechata V'nechamata Damiran Be'alma V'imru Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabbah Min Shemaya V'chayim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom B'mromav Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Shabbat Shalom and welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's in-person and live-stream Shabbat morning service. Yasher Koach to Steve for leading us this morning in Shacharit, and I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Rabbi Rafi Spitzer. It's a pleasure to join with you, whether you're joining us in the sanctuary or by live stream. As I mentioned, this is my daughter Ellie. She wanted also to be introduced. As I mentioned at the beginning of the service, we have made some changes to our COVID reopening protocols. You'll notice that the one side of the sanctuary, the chairs are reset back to the way that they used to be before the pandemic. The other side has some more space so that people who would like to be spaced out can be. We are asking that everybody keep their masks on regardless of vaccination status. One thing that we are changing is that we are going to bring Gabaim up onto the bima to make sure that our Torah reading is as good as it can be. But we are keeping the aliyot at the stender that Steve is standing at now. Because of that, we will continue to be doing Hagba at the beginning of the Torah service, even though in Ashkenazi custom it's usually at the end. Doing Hagba at the beginning of the Torah service gives everybody an opportunity to have a visual recognition of the text of the Torah at the beginning of the service. And if you have been honored with an aliyah, please have the visual recognition of the Torah in your mind when you say the blessings for your aliyah. We continue now with the service for taking the Torah out of the Ark, page 394.
Ein kamocha ve'Elohim Adonai ve'ein kema'asecha malchutecha malchut kol olamim Umemshaltecha bechol dor vador. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai imloch leolam vaed, Adonai oz le'amo yitein, Adonai yavarech et amo v'shalom, av harachamim, heitiv avirtzoncha et Zion, tivnei chomot Yerushalayim, tivnei chomot Yerushalayim, ki vecha levad batachnu, melech el ram benisa, adon olamim.
We rise as the Aron Kodesh is open.
Vayhi bin soa ha'aron, vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai, ve'afutzu oivecha, ve'anusu mesanecha mipanecha, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, u'devar Adonai miYerushalayim, Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, le'amo Yisrael, b'kedushato. Brik shmei Rama, brik. Bebe anarachet, velish me kadisha, kadisha yakira, ata emar tushbechan, yehe rava kodamach, detiv tach libi beoraita, Vetashli mishalin delibi, velihi badechol amach Yisrael, letav l'chayin velishlam. Amen. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu,
Gadlu Adonai iti, uneromema Shemo Yachdav. Lecha Adonai, Hagdula, V'Hagevura, V'Hatiferet, V'Hanetzach, V'Hahod, Ki Kol B'Shamayim U'Va'aretz. Lecha Adonai, Hamamlacha, V'Haminaseh, Lechol Erosh. Ravemu, 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 Adonai Elohim. Vehishtachavu lehadom raglav kadoshu Romimu Adonai Eloheinu Vehishtachavu Lehar Kodsho Ki Kadosh Adonai Eloheinu.
We remain standing for Hagba. Vizo Tatorah Asher Samoshem Bnei Yisrael Al Pi Adonai Yad Moshe. You may be seated. We turn now to our Chumashim, the red Eitz Chaim Chumash, and we turn to page 845. It's our custom to read a third of the Torah portion each week. This year, we are doing the middle third. Where we left off at the end of last week's Torah, in the middle of last week's Torah portion, was the account of the traveling of the nation of Israel and the way that they traveled in formation by tribe, and they traveled as God's cloud left and the cloud came back. There was an episode that we didn't read this year of the people complaining. There was an episode of Miriam and Aaron speaking badly about Moses. An episode of Eldad and Medad prophesying in the camp. A lot of stuff happens in Parashat Ba'alotecha. It's full of plot points. And we come to the beginning of this week's Torah portion, and yes. Hang on one second. And it seems that the people are ready to enter the land of Israel after going out of Egypt and crossing the Reed Sea, and after getting the Torah at Sinai and having some encounters in the desert. It's now been about a year since they left, a year and a half since they left Egypt, and the people seem poised to enter the land. They stay at Mount Sinai for about a year, but they have now left Sinai, and they send in scouts to scout out the land before entering it together. And the episode that we read today is the episode of the report of the scouts and the sin of the people in following the report of the scouts, who say that they felt like they were grasshoppers compared to the inhabitants of the land. V'chein hayinu be'eineihem, we were as chagavim, we were as grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we were also in their eyes. So we pick up with that sin, the sin of not having self-worth, the sin of ascribing one's own lack of self-worth to other people. We pick that up on page 845, chapter 14, verse 8. Vayazor v'yagin v'yoshia l'chol ha'chosim bo v'nomar amen hakol ha'lovenu kavod l'Torah ta'od Rachel bat Eliezer v'yocheved aliyah rishona baruch shenatan Torah l'ma Yisrael b'kushato v'atem adbekim b'Adonai Elohechem ha'im kulchem hayom. Since we did not have a minyan at the time of Baruch Hu, this is our Baruch Hu, so I'm going to ask that everybody stand and respond to Baruch Hu, since that's customary.
Steve, it's you.
Oh, please. What?
No,
No, it's rude.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvarach. Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam voed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech olam. Asher bachar banu mikol hamim. V'nata lanu et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
May be seated.
Amen. Im chafetz banu Adonai vehivi otanu el eretz hazot untana lanu eretz asher hi zavach halav udbash Akbar Adonai, al timrotu, ve'atem, al tiru, et am haaretz, ki lachmenechem sarsila melechem, v'Adonai itanu al tiraum. Vayomru kol haida lirgum otam be'avanim ukvod Adonai nera be'ohel moed el kol b'nei Yisrael.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, asher nata lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tachenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. The second aliyah can be found on page 846, verse 11. Ya'amod. Yirach Asher ben Moshe Yudit, aliyah hashenit. The second aliyah can be found, I already said. Page, verse 11. 846.
Baruch et Adonai HaMvarach.
Baruch Hanai Barach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMvarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'cha banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayom Adonai el Moshe, Adonai yinatsuni ha'am hazeh, v'Adonai lo yaminu vi, v'kol ha'atot asher asiti b'kirbo, anochi v'adev... Akenu b'dever v'yorshenu, v'yaseh otcha l'goy gadol v'yatzu mimenu, vayomer Moshe el Adonai, Vishamu Mitzrayim Kelita Bechocha et Hamaze Mirkibo Viamru El Yosef Haratazot Shamuko Ki Ata Adonai Bikerev Hamaze Asher Ayin Va'ayin Nira Ata Adonai V'enecha Omed Alechem Uvamod Anan Ata Cholek Lifnechem Yomam Uvamod Esh Laila והימתה את העם הזה כאש אחד, ואמרו הגויים אשר שמעו את שמך לאמור, ובלתי יוכל את אדוני להביא את העם הזה אל הארץ אשר נשבע לכם, והשתחוויתם במדבר, ועתה יגדל נחוק אדוני כאשר דיברת לאמור, אדוני ארך אפיים ורחסת נושא עוון ופשע, ונקה לא ינקה Poket avon avot al banim ve'al sheleshim ve'alvim sulakna lavod hazamek ki godel chasdecha v'chasher nasata la'am hazeh mimitzrayim v'yad hena vayomer Adonai sulakti kidvarecha.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Ya'amod. Tamod. Esther bat Eliyahu v'tzipora aliyah shlishit. The aliyah that we just concluded, the second aliyah, you'll probably find very familiar from the Yom Kippur Selichot liturgy. The idea here is when the people sinned the sin of the golden calf, God was ready to wipe out the whole people and to replace them with just Moshe and Moshe's family. And Moshe said, if you do that, you might as well kill me too. Wipe me out also from your book, because I'm the leader of these people. You can't just start over with me. I refuse. And at that moment, God taught Moshe what words to say to calm God down. And we know them. They are the words Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, Erech Apayim v'Rav Chesed v'Emet, right? What we call the 13 attributes of mercy, God's mercy, which we say in front of the ark on festivals, and which we say many times over the course of the Yom Kippur liturgy. And here, the people have sinned once again. They are going along with the report of the spies. Yes, that's our Yedid Nefesh Bencher. I have it here just in case we want to bench. They've gone along with the report of the spies, and they have felt that they are not worthy to inherit the land, to enter the land. They do not show faith that God will be with them in their entrance into the land. And God is once again ready to wipe out the whole people and to start over. And here, Moshe uses that exact thing that God told Moshe to do. God said, say these words and I'll calm down. And here, what we just read, Moshe said, God, you are slow to anger and abounding in kindness, right? He says the attributes of mercy and God and praise for God to pardon the people. And indeed, God says, Salachti kidvarecha, I have forgiven them, I have pardoned them as you asked, as you requested. And it's that idea that we have like maybe a secret code that if you say these words, then God will forgive us, that we repeat over and over and over during our Yom Kippur liturgy, trying to get God to remember God's covenant with our ancestors and God's covenant with us, that even though we are not worthy of forgiveness, even though we have sinned and will continue to sin, we hope that God will nonetheless act with mercy and forgive us anyway. And so that's why these verses are so prominent and in our Slichot service, and we repeat them many, many times. We continue now on page 847, verse 21.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Amarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher b'charbanu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen.
Amen. V'olam chayani. Vayimale kavod Adonai et kol haaretz. Ki kol ha'anashim. Haruim ekavodi v'yototai asher asiti b'mitzrayim uvamidbar. Vayinasu oti. Ze asher pamim v'lo shamu b'koli. זה עשר פעמים וכל שמעו בקולי, אם יראו את הארץ אשר נשבעתי לאבותם, וכל מנעצי ולא יראוך, וידיך לב, עקב חייתה רוח אחרת עמו, וימלא אחרי, והביא אותי אל הארץ אשר בא שמה, וזרעו יורישנה. וחמלכי וחכני יושב בעמק מחר, כנוסו לכם, המדבר דרך ים סוף.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. Talmud.
One goes for a while.
Hina. Ahaya.
And with Lator
Aya.
Haaretz.
Aya.
Aliyah. Harivi'it.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Adonai. I'm sorry. Baruch Adonai hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. Bottom of page 847, verse 26.
וידבר עיני אל משה ואל אהרון לאמור, עד מתי לדהרה הזאת אשר המה מלינים עלי את עליונות בני ישראל, אשר המה מלינים עלי שמעתי, אמור עליהם, חי אני נאום אדוני, אם לא כאשר דיברתם באוזני, כי אעשה לכם, במדבר הזה יפלו פגריכם וכל פקודיכם וכל מספרכם מבין 20 שנה ומעלה אשר הלינותם עלי, אם אתם תבואו אל הארץ אשר נשאתי את ידי לשכן אתם בה, כי אם חלב בן יפונה ויהושע בן נון וטפכם אשר אמרתם לבעז יהיה, והביאתי אותם, והבאתי אותם, וידעו את הארץ אשר נסתם בה. ופגריכם אותה אתם יפלו במדבר הזה, ובניכם יהיו רועים במדבר 40 שנה, ונשאו את תזונתכם עד תם פגריכם במדבר, במספר הימים אשר תתם את הארץ 40 יום. יום לשנה, יום ישנה, תישאו את עוונותיכם 40 שנה, וידעתם את תנועתי. אני אדוני דיברתי, אם לא זאת אעשה לכל העדה הרעה הזאת הנועדים עלי במדבר הזה. יטמאו שם, ימותו, והאנשים אשר שלח משה לתור את הארץ, וישובו, וילינו עליו את כל העדה להוציא דיבה הארץ, וימותו האנשים מוציאי דיבת הארץ רעה, במגפה לפני אדוני. ויהושע בן נון וכלב בן יפונה חיו מן האנשים חכם, והחוכמים לתור את הארץ.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tokinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Tamod. Bracha Chana bat Avram David v'simcha. Aliyah Chamishit. The fifth Aliyah can be found on page 849, chapter 14, verse 39.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamavarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamavarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bacha banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. V'daber Moshe et hadvarim ha'eleh el kol b'nei Yisrael. V'yitablu ha'am me'od v'ashkimu b'boker. V'yalu el rosh hahar lemor hineni v'alinu el hamakom. Asher amar Adonai ki chatanu. V'yomer Moshe lama zeh. Atem avrim et pi Adonai v'hi lo titzlach. Al ta'alo ki en Adonai v'kir bechem v'lo tinagfu lifnei oivechem.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
I'm 6.
What?
I'm 6.
Tamod.
Shoshana tzemach bat chaim v'fega.
Shoshana Tzemach Bar Chaim V'Fega Aliyah HaShishit. You can close it just for a sec.
No worries.
This coming year is going to be the Shemitah year, the 7th year in an ongoing cycle where for 6 years we're producing produce in the land, and on the 7th year we let the land lie fallow. This is as it is commanded in the end of the book of Leviticus, which we read just a few weeks ago. And so this summer is the summer leading up to the sabbatical year in the land of Israel. And some of the laws of the sabbatical year actually start in the year before, in the 6th year of the 7th year cycle, because there's a big question about whether plants that have begun to grow in the 6th year but are harvested in the 7th year, say you have a late crop of apples that are not going to mature until October, but the new year begins September 5th, right, at Rosh Hashanah. So what do you do about those apples? Are you allowed to plant them? Are you allowed to cultivate them? Are you allowed to do anything with them if you know that they are actually the crop of the following year? So apples aren't a good example because they're trees and they're going to go, mostly without human intervention. But there are a lot of products that require a lot of effort to produce their crops. Now, this doesn't apply anywhere outside of the land of Israel. But the organization Hazon, which is a food justice organization, an international food justice organization, is doing this summer a project called the Shemitah Project. And the idea is to start thinking about the way in which food justice and environmental justice overlap, and in what ways does the Shemitah, this 7th year, affect our own understanding of what it means to be Jewish people living in a world where human beings have caused climate change, and that climate change is creating an environment in which the world, there are ever greater catastrophic storms and events. And is there something rooted in this idea of the Shemitah that can help us to relate to the Jewish values, the Jewish concepts around care of the land, care of the environment, and also justice for everyone? Because the Shemitah wasn't just about letting the land lie fallow, it was also an economic reset. Anybody with a debt had their debt forgiven, and they had the ability to, anybody who was indentured slave, right, for a purpose of, for a period of a certain number of years in order to pay off a debt, those people went free. And so in the Torah, the economy and the agricultural land and justice in general are all tied together metaphorically. And the truth is, it's still that way to this day, even though we try to keep everything sanitized and separated into different silos. And so a rabbi named Bruce Spearer taught this teaching with regard to, it came out on Hazon's website blog this week, in thinking, all this summer, there's been a push from Hazon to really be thinking about how every parsha relates in some way to this idea of Shemitah, and especially to the preparing for Shemitah. And I found this one really meaningful, and I'm going to share it with you. So it says in Leviticus, "Now if you say to yourselves, what are we to eat in the 7th year? For we may not sow, we may not gather our produce. Then I will dispatch my blessing for you during the 6th year, so that it will yield produce for 3 years." So God anticipates the problem with letting the land lie fallow for 1 year is not just that you won't have food that year, but that the 6th year has to be enough food to feed you in the 6th year, and to feed you in the 7th year when you're not doing any harvesting, and to feed you in the 1st year of the next cycle when you haven't done any planting in the 7th year. So the 6th year really has to be a bumper crop. But God is promising that this is the way the system is going to work. There'll be enough produce in the 6th year to satisfy for 3 years. The Torah understands that humans are risk-averse and afraid to change the status quo, even when it will lead to great blessing. Shlach Lecha opens with God's command to the Israelites to send men to scout the land of Canaan, which I am given to the Israelite people. 12 scouts or spies are sent out and report back to the whole Israelite community. They all agree that the land is good, that it is flowing in milk and honey, just as God has promised. But, except for Caleb and Joshua, the spies also report that their enemies are too strong, and some are even giants. The whole community becomes frenzied with fear that they cannot conquer their land and are being led to their death. God becomes angry with their lack of faith and declares that over the next 40 years, everyone, except for Caleb and Joshua, will die in the wilderness. As a result of their fear, no one of that generation realized the blessing of entering the promised land, except for Joshua and Caleb. A similar dynamic appears during the Shemitah year, when the Torah commands us not to plant our fields. Anticipating our fear, God responds, "Now if you should say to yourselves, what are we to eat in the 7th year? For we may not sow, we may not gather our produce. Then I will dispatch my blessing for you during the 6th year, so that it yields produce for 3 years." Like in Parshat Shlach, taking the radical actions commanded during the Shemitah year leads to a great blessing, a more just society. In both cases, radical action that pushes us out of our physical and psychological comfort zone is required to bring great blessings into the world. Fear becomes the obstacle to creating necessary change. We can also substitute the significant issues of our day, the progression of multiple environmental crises, growing social inequality, the legacy of racial injustice, into this framework. Each of these issues requires massive shifts at an individual and societal level, but promises to build a sustainable world with thriving communities where historically marginalized peoples can experience safety, equity, and dignity. Fear can keep us all from reaching our own individual and collective promised lands. Fear of upsetting the status quo, fear of change, fear there is not enough, and fear of the unknown. However, if we move forward with the faith that one step at a time we will be taken care of, we will be guided, and there is enough, perhaps we will receive the blessings on the other side of our most significant challenges. Ultimately, the Torah tells us that the next generation of Israelites took the leap of faith and were able to enter the promised land. We continue now with the 6th Aliyah, which can be found on page 849, verse 43.
Baruch Adonai Hambarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Ki ha'amaleki v'ha'kenani sham lifnechem unfaltem becharev ki al kein shavtem me'acharei Adonai v'lo yeh Adonai imachem vayapilu lalot el rosh hahar ve'aron brit Adonai u'Moshe lo mashu mikerev hamachaneh Vayered hamaleki v'hakenani hayoshev bahar hahu vayachtum ad hachorma vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor daber el bnei Yisrael v'marta aleihem ki tavo el eretz moshevotechem asher ani notem lachem Vasitem ishe v'Adonai ola ozevach lifalei neder o bindava o b'moadechem lasot reach nichoach v'Adonai min habakar o min hatzon.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet b'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yamod. Micha ben Avraham Avinu v'Sara Imeinu. Aliyah HaShevi'it. The 7th Aliyah can be found on page 850, chapter 15, verse 4.
Baruch Hu Adonai Baruch. Baruch Baruch Barach Le'olam Va'ed, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher b'chavanu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato, Baruch Atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. V'hikriv hamakriv, korbano ladonai, mincha solod isaron, balul b'rivitahin, shaman. Vayayin lanesach rivitachin, tase ahola ola zavach, lekeves ha'echad, ole ayel tase mincha, solet shenei esronim, bululal v'shemen shlishitachin, vayayin lanesach shlishitachin, takriv reach nechok ladonai.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah temet v'chayei olam natan v'tochenu, Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. We rise as the ark is opened for the healing prayer. Mishebeirach avotenu Mekor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishebeirach avotenu Abraham Yitzchak Yaakov. Sarah, Rivka Rachel, Leah, Yivrech Pet Acholim, Et Shai Aviad ben Balfura, Vet Fegalea bat Minsasura, Vet Shalom ben Chaya, Vet Rachel bat Avram, Vet Andrew Parisi, Vet Chris Parisi, Vet Yudit bat Reuven Berezel, Vet Sharona Nachama bat Reuven Berezel, Vet Gabriel Mordechai ben Pesi, Vet Omari Gray, Vet Chaya bat Devora, Vet Leah bat Devora, Vet Yakira bat Devora, Vet Bluma bat Gittel, Vet Dina bat Fagala, Vet Eliza bat Dina, Vet Akiva ben Gittel, Vet Miriam bat Malka, Vet Eliyahu ben Malka, Vet Bracha bat Batya, Vet Miriam bat Sarah, Vet Menachem Mendel ben Sipora, Vet Robert Borschwitz, Vet Yoreh bat Sarah, Vet Don Moshe ben Nani, Vet Kyle Scheffler, Vet Cecilia Lynn, Vet Michal Ruth bat Tova, Vet Linda Pearlstein, Vet Robert Pearlstein, Vet Michael Roberts, Vet Eric Hurst, Vet Riva Bela bat Reza, Vet Sima Freda bat Chana Yenta, Vet Chana Sora bat Susha Nechama, Vet Shlomo Moshe ben Miriam, Vet Yitamasha bat Rachel, Vet Dylan Middleton, Vet Yaakov Moshe ben Batya Mindel, Vet Perry bat Shulamit, Vet Manesh Yisachar ben Rachel, Vet Shmuel ben Yudid, Vet Shalom ben Chaya, Vet Usher Yosef ben Fegamalka, Vet Chaim Reuven ben Hinda, Vet Amy Laughlin, Vet Eliezer Ephraim ben Chaim Yehuda, Vet Alan Finger, Vet Shlomo ben Yehuda Zev, Vet David Aaron ben Siva, Vet Berish Lazer ben Sivia, Vet Matt Hopkins, Vet from Abatsara. V'yet kol hacholim b'gilag shazot hakadosh baruch hu yimalei rachmim aleim lachzikam l'rapotam nishlach lahem meira refuah shema min hashamayim refuat hanefesh refuat haguf l'chol evereihem migdeihem b'toch shar chol Yisrael v'haolam v'chazek yedidei oskim tzorchayim shabbatim yozok v'harefuah krova lavo hashta bagal arizman kariv v'nomar amen mi shebeirach imotenu Mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Yitkada v'yitkada shemei rabba ve'alma dirach yirtei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayeichonu yomeichon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael bagala uv'izman karim v'meru amen yesh mei rabba mevarach le'alam l'almei almaya yitbarach Yitbarach, Vishtabach, Vipar, Vitramam, Vinase, Vithadar, Vitale, Vitalal, Shmei Gudesha, Berichu, Leila, Min Kol Birchata, Veshirata, Tushbechata, Venechemata, Damiran, Bealma, Bimeru, Amen. Yamod. Shimshon ben Yeshia. Likriyat Haftarah. You may be seated. We continue with the Maftir, which can be found on page 850, verse 4.
Baruch Adonai Barak. Baruch Adonai Barak Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Olam. Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Amim V'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten Torah.
Amen.
Amen. V'hikriv hamakriv korbanol Adonai mincha solet isaron v'lehu b'rvit achin shamen v'yayin lanesek rvit achin taseh ahola ala zavach v'keves hachad ola ayal taseh mincha solet shnei esronim v'lula v'shemen shlishit achin v'yayin lanesek shlishit achin takriv reach nechok l'Adonai.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Olam Asher Natan Lanu Torah Emet V'chayei Olam Nata B'tocheinu Baruch Atah Adonai Noten Torah.
Amen. The Torah will now be wrapped as we turn to page 857 for the Haftarah for Parashat Shlach Lecha. The Haftarah comes from the book of from the book of Joshua, chapter 2. It is the description of the second time that spies are sent to tour the land. In this case, after Moshe's death, Joshua sends again folks to go into the land to scout it out before the people enter the land. This is after the 40 years, after the generation described in this week's Torah portion has all died out, except for Joshua and Caleb. Joshua doesn't repeat the mistake that Moses made of sending 12 spies. Joshua just sends 2. 2 seems to be the right number, since only 2 came back with the glowing report. So he sends 2. The story from Joshua chapter 2, which you can find on page 857, includes the fact that these 2 spies were saved by a woman of the night named Rachav. It is a wonderful story, and you can follow along as Art chants page 857.
Yeah, I just got to get set up here. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Olam Asher Bachar B'nviim Tovim V'ratzav V'divreihem Hanemarim Be'emet Baruch Atah Adonai Haboker B'Torah Moshe Avdo U'Yisrael Amo V'nviei Ha'emet V'Tzedek Vayishlach Yoshua Bin-Nun Min Hashitim Shnayim anashim miraglim cheresh lemor lechu ru et haaretz v'yet Yericho vayelechu vayavo beit isha zona ushma rachav vayishkivu shama vayeyamer lemelech Yericho lemor Hine anashim ba'u heina halayla mibnei Yisrael lachpor et haaretz vayishlach melech Yericho el Rachav lemor hotzi anashim aboim elayich asher ba'u lebeitech ki lachpor et kol haaretz ba'u vatikach haisha Et shnei anashim v'titzbeno v'tomer ken ba'u elai anashim v'lo yadati me'ayin chema v'yihi hashar liskor b'choshech anashim yatzau v'lo yadati anahalchu anashim ridfu maher achareihem ki tasigum Vehi elatam hagaga, vatitmanem bifshtei ha'etz, ha'choruchot la'al hagag. V'hanashim radfu achareihem derech hayarden, al hamabrot, v'ashar sagaru, acharei kasher, yatsu harodfim achareihem. Behema terem yishkavun, vehi alta alehem alagag. Vatomer el anashim yadati, ki natan Adonai lachem et haaretz, v'chi nofla imatchem aleinu, v'chi namogu, ko yoshvei haaretz mipnechem. Ki shamanu et hovish Adonai et me yamsuf mibnechem v'tzeitchem mimitzrayim v'yasher asitem lishnei malchei emori asher be'ver hayarden l'sichon u'le'og asher charamtem otam. Vanishma vayimas levavenu, velo kama od ruach bish mipnechem. Ki Adonai Elohechem, hu Elohim bashamayim mimal, v'al haaretz mitachat. V'ata yishavun ali b'Adonai, ki asiti imachem chased. V'yasitem gamatem im beit avi chesed, unetatem li ot emet, v'chayitem et avi v'et amimi, v'et achai v'et achiotai, v'et kol asher lahem, v'tzaltem et nafshotenu mimavet. Vayomru la'anashim, nafshenu tachtechem lamut, im lo tagidu et devarenu zeh, v'haya, v'ted Adonai lanu et aretz, v'yasinu ima chesed v'yemet, v'toridem b'chevel b'yad hachalon, ki beita b'kir hachoma, uv'achoma hi yoshavet. Vatomer lahem hara lechu, penifku vachem arotfim, v'nach beitem shama shloshet yamim, ad shov arotfim v'achar telchu ledarkechem. Vayomru ele anashim, nikiyim anachnu, mishvuatecha zeh asher hishbatanu. Hine anachnu vayim ba'aretz, et tikva chut hashani hazeh, tiksheri b'chalon, asher horadetenu vo, v'yet avich v'yet imech, v'yet achayich, v'yet kobed avich, tiasvi elayich habayta. V'haya kol asher yitzeh midalte v'yetzecha chutza damu v'rosho v'yanachnu nikiyim v'chol asher yiyeh itach b'bayit damu v'roshenu im yad tiyeh bo v'im tagidi et devarenu zeh v'ayinu nikiyim mishvuatecha asher hishbatanu. Vatomer k'dvarchem kein hu, v'tishalem v'yechu v'tishkor et tikvat hashani b'chalon. V'yechu v'yavo ahara, v'yeshvu sham shloshet yamim, ad shavu arotfim, v'yivakshu arotfim, v'chol haderech v'lo matza'u. Vayashuvu shnei anashim, vayerdu me'ahar, vayavru vayavo el Yehoshua bin Nun, vayisapru lo et kol hamotzot otam, vayomru el Yehoshua, ki natan Adonai, beyadenu et kol haaretz, v'gam namogu kol yoshvei haaretz mipaneinu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol ha'olamim, tzadik b'chol adorot, ha'el ha'neman ha'omer v'yoseh, ha'medaber u'mekayim, shekol devarav emet v'tzedek. Neman atah hu Adonai Eloheinu, v'nemanim devarecha, v'devar echad midvarecha, for lo yashuv reikam, ki hamelech neman v'rachaman atah, baruch atah Adonai. Ha'el ha'neman b'chol devarav.
Amen.
Rachem al Tzion ki beit chayenu v'lalu v'nefesh toshia b'mera b'yameinu baruch atah Adonai misameach Tzion b'vaneha. Samcheinu Adonai Eloheinu b'Eliyahu hanavi avdecha uv'malchut beit David meshichecha b'mera yavo v'yagel libenu al ki solo yeshev zar v'lo yinchalu od acherim et kevodo. Ki v'shem kodshecha nishpata lo shelo yichbenero le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai, Magen David.
Amen.
Ala Torah, v'al avodah, v'al anvim, v'al yom HaShabbat hazeh, shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu likdusha v'limnucha, lechavod u'tifaret. Ala kol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach, u'mevorachim otach. Yiparach shimcha b'fi kol chai tamid le'olam va'ed, baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh ha-Shabbat.
Amen. Yasher koach to Art for chanting the Haftarah, and big Yasher koach to Joe and Susan for chanting Torah this morning. We turn now to page 418 for the blessing which announces the upcoming month of Tammuz. Rachel Besser will be announcing the new month in honor of the 20th anniversary of her bat mitzvah.
Yehi ratzon milfanecha, Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu, shetchadesh aleinu et hachodesh haba l'tova v'livracha, v'titen lanu chayim arukim, chayim shel shalom, chayim shel tova, chayim shel bracha, chayim shel parnasa, חיים של חילוץ עצמות, חיים שיש בהם יראת שמיים, יראת שמיים ויראת חטא, חיים שאין בהם בושה וכלימה, חיים של אושר וכבוד, חיים שתהא בנו אהבת תורה ויראת שמיים, חיים שימלאו משאלות ליבנו לטובה אמן סלע. מי שעשה ניסים לאבותינו וגאל אותם מעבדות לחירות, הוא יגאל אותנו בקרוב ויקבץ נידחנו מארבע כנפות הארץ. חברים, חברים, כל ישראל, ונאמר אמן. ראש חודש תמוז יהיה ביום חמישי וביום שישי, הבא עלינו ועל כל ישראל לטובה.
The new month of Tammuz will begin this Wednesday night, Thursday, and Friday. May it come onto our people with much, much blessing.
יחד שהוא הקדוש ברוך הוא עלינו ועל כל עמו בית ישראל לחיים
You may be seated as we continue with Ashrei, page 420.
And while I will not be anywhere near as mellifluous says, Rachel, I am celebrating the 43rd anniversary of my bat mitzvah.
Oh, mazel tov.
Ashrei Yosvei Beitecha, Oji Hallelujah, Selah, Ashrei Tehillah LeDavid, Aromimcha Elohai HaMelech, Arvacha Shimcha Leolam Va'ed.
V'chol yom avarchecha, v'ala shimcha le'olam va'ed.
Gadol Adonai Me'od, V'ligdulato Ein Cheker.
To'odor yishavach ma'asecha, v'gvuratecha yagidu.
Hadar Kavod Hodecha, U'divrei Neflotecha Asicha.
Bezuz naratecha yomeru, tulatecha asprena.
Zecher Rav Tuvcha Yaviu, V'tiktarcha Yiranenu.
Hadun barachum Adonai, erech hapayim udol chesed.
Tov Adonai Lakol, V'rachamav Kol Ma'asav.
Yodu Adonai kol ma'asecha, v'chasidecha yivarchucha.
Kevod Malchucha Yomeru, Uvudacha Yedaberu.
Lo di'alivni adam gvurota, v'kvod adar malchuto.
Malchutecha Malchut Kol Olamim, Umem Shaltecha V'chol Dor V'ador.
Somech Adonai l'chol anoflim, v'zokef l'chol akfufim.
Einei Kol Elecha Yisaveru, V'atanotem Lahem Et Achlam Bito.
Poteach et yadecha, u'matzpiach l'chol chai ratzon.
Tzadik Adonai V'chol Derecha, V'chasid V'chol Ma'asav.
Karov Adonai l'chol korav, l'chol asher yikra'u v'emet.
V'tzon Yirei Av Yaseh, V'et Shavatam Yishma V'yoshiem.
Shomer Adonai et kol oavav, v'et kol rishayim yashmid.
Tilad Adonai Yedaber Birpi, V'yavarech Kol Basar Shem Kadsho Le'olam Va'ed.
V'anachnu nevarech yam, yatav yad olam, hallelujah. We rise for the service to return the Torah to the Ark, page 422 at the bottom.
Yehallelu et Shem Adonai, Ki niskav Shemo Levado. Hodu al eretz v'shamayim, v'yarem keren leyamo, Tila v'chol chasidav, Livnei Yisrael am krovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah, Mizmor LeDavid.
Shabbat Shalom. I already spoke more than I usually do during the Torah service, so I'm going to be very brief this morning. But I'm going to start with a poem that was written by my friend, Rabbi Zohar Atkins. Stray. Do not stray after your hearts and eyes. Numbers chapter 15, verse 39. Praying to change God's mind feels like trying to open an open door with a feather. Praying to keep God's mind from changing feels like trying to stop a revolving door with a remote whose battery is forever a handbreadth away. Praying not to stray feels like straying into a used bookshop and finding the same book in 613 different fonts. Praying for the muse feels like placing an order and receiving only substitute items. Praying to be myself feels redundant. Lord, grant that I may be me today. Straying into God's mind feels like praying to be a feather, and becoming a remote feels like answering the door and finding a book I know before opening is the story of someone whose life is changed by reading it and reading it. I'm going to read it again. Stray by Zohar Atkins. Do not stray after your hearts and eyes. Numbers 15:39. Praying to change God's mind feels like trying to open an open door with a feather. Praying to keep God's mind from changing feels like trying to stop a revolving door with a remote whose battery is forever a handbreadth away. Praying not to stray feels like straying into a used bookshop and finding the same book in 613 different fonts. Praying for the muse feels like placing an order and receiving only substitute items. Praying to be myself feels redundant. Lord, grant that I may be me today. Straying into God's mind feels like praying to be a feather, and becoming a remote feels like answering the door and finding a book I know before opening is the story of someone whose life is changed by reading it and reading it. This week's Torah portion, Parashat Shlach Lecha, concludes with the mitzvah of tzitzit, and I invite you to turn in the Chumash to page 854, and we'll read together in the English. I mean, you don't have to read it along with me, but you can follow along as I read. The Lord said to Moses as follows, "Speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves fringes, tzitzit, on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. That shall be your fringe. Look at it and recall all the commandments of the Lord and observe them, so that you do not follow your heart and eyes in your lustful urge. Thus you shall be reminded to observe all my commandments and be holy to your God. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, the Lord, your God." Probably you recognize this passage. It's the third paragraph of the Shema, which we say every day, at least twice a day. Lo taturu acharei levavchem ve'acharei einechem. Do not taturu after your hearts and after your eyes. Do not stray. Do not stray after your hearts and after your eyes. It's interesting that the word laturu, lo taturu, is the same word that at the beginning of this Torah portion, God commands that the people go to tour, latur et haaretz, to go out and scout the land. If you're just reading this passage, if you're just reading the Torah, say, in English, and you read through this week's Torah portion, it's startling that it ends with the mitzvah of tzitzit. You wonder to yourself, why is this here? What is the connection of this law to the rest of the Torah portion? What is going on here? But when you read it in Hebrew, there are linguistic connections in this law to the rest of the narrative part of this Torah portion. Lo taturu is the main one, but there are others as well. It's fascinating to think about that connection. Sometimes we imagine that laws are separate from narratives. We talk in Judaism about halakha and agadah, about the legal texts and legend texts. But the amazing thing about Judaism, as the great philosopher Robert Cover wrote in Nomos and Narrative, his great essay, Judaism teaches us that law and narrative are innately intertwined. You can't have this law of tzitzit without the story of the spies, and the story of the spies concludes with the command that each of us create a reminder to avoid whatever the sin of the spies was. The Torah portion concludes with the mitzvah of tzitzit, the commandment to wear fringes on the corners of one's garments as a reminder not to stray. The same word that describes the spies, latur, is used here, making an explicit connection between the sin of the spies and the commandment of the fringe. Zohar Atkins, same rabbi of this poem, writes, "It's as if to say that the fringes might have protected the spies from giving in to the pandemonium, or else that when we look at our own fringes, we should imagine ourselves as spies, confronted with the same challenge as our ancestors. How do we live in a world that is fearsome without losing faith? The fringes are supposed to remind us of our obligation to a higher purpose. And in so doing, they will turn our own lives into a journey into the promised land. Will we fall short of our own micro-promised lands because we, like our ancestors, allow facts and feelings to become inseparable? Or can we take a cool view of what is and then tell ourselves that present reality gets a vote on what might be, but not a veto?" The word for scouting, latur, shares letters and sounds in common with the word Torah, which means instruction. This wordplay turns the message of the spies, the commandment of the tzitzit, into a stand-in for a message about Torah itself. The book is something that we can spy out, like the land, on the assumption that it is terrible, unwise, immoral, or else that it is indeed a great text, but one that is simply too difficult to understand. On the other hand, the fact that the Torah places many real obstacles in our path should not deter us from believing that we might enter it in spite of those obstacles and in spite of our own deficiencies and limitations. We need tzitzit, everyday reminders, fringes, to help us remember that is and can are not the same, that consensus does not equal truth, that we can be critical voices in times of collective untruth. Rabbi Zohar Atkins makes one last wordplay. In the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, the voice of the turtle dove, the Tor, is a sign of celebration and arrival. The same letters that spell spy and impulsive strayer, Tor, signify our potential to convert our would-be naysaying reports into song. We are not free from gathering information, nor are we free from judging and evaluating it. Yet when we evaluate with faith and humility, we bring the hum of the dove whose presence is a sign of a subsiding flood. If the first promised land was the dry land unto which Noah walked after the deluge. Every subsequent promised land is the land whose habitation means that the world was not, is not, will not be destroyed. Stray. Do not stray after your hearts and eyes. Numbers 15:39. Praying to change God's mind feels like trying to open an open door with a feather. Praying to keep God's mind from changing feels like trying to stop a revolving door with a remote whose battery is forever a handbreadth away. Praying not to stray feels like straying into a used bookshop and finding the same book in 613 different fonts. Praying for the muse feels like placing an order and receiving only substitute items. Praying to be myself feels redundant. Lord, grant that I may be me today. Straying into God's mind feels like praying to be a feather, and becoming a remote feels like answering the door and finding a book. I know before opening is the story of someone whose life is changed by reading it and reading it. Shabbat Shalom. We continue with Musaf, page 428. Following the Chatzi Kaddish, we'll join with Susan for the Musaf Amidah, which begins on page 430. We rise for Chatzi Kaddish. Following the Kiddusha, we'll continue with the individual whispered Amidah. Page 428.
Yikara v'yikara shemei rabba.
Amen.
Be'alma divrach yirtei, yamlich malchutei, b'chayechonu v'yomecho, u'chayedocho beit Yisrael. Ba'agala, ba'agala, u'bizman kari, yimeru amen. Yehi shnei rabba mevorach, olam ne'amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal shmei dekudisha v'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran v'alma v'yimeru. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanara, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, V'Zocher Chastei Avot, Umevi goel livnei b'neihem leman shemo b'ahava melech ozer fokedu Moshiach magen Baruch atah Adonai magen Avraham lefoked Sarah atah gibor le'olam Adonai mechayei metim atarav lehoshia mechalkel chayim b'chesed Mechayei meitim berachamim rabim, somech noflim berofer cholim, umatir asurim, umekayem emunato lishenei afar, michamocha bal giverot, umido melach, melech memit umechaye umatzmeach Yeshua v'ne'eman atah l'chayot meitim Baruch atah Adonai mechayei hametim. Naritzcha v'nakdishcha kasotziach sarfei kodesh hamakdishim shimcha b'kodesh kakatuv hayad Nevi'echa v'karazel ze'v'yamar Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Shadonai tzvot Melech haaretz kivodo כבודו מלא עולם, משרתיו שואלים זה לזה, איה מקום כבודו למתם ברוך יאמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. ממקומו יפן ברחמים, יחנם יחדים שמו, ערב ובוקר בכל יום תמיד, פעמיים באהבה שמה אומרים. שמע ישראל, הוא אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו, הוא מלכינו והוא מושיענו, והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו, שנית לעיני כל חי, והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו, שנית לעיני כל חי. להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם. ודברי קודשך כתוב לאמור, מלך אדוני אלוהי ציון, לדור ודור, הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גדלך, ולנצח נצחים כשבחך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, כי המלך גדול וקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
Having completed your individual whispered Amidah, please continue davening. We join together for Kaddish Shalem, page 506.
יקרא ויקרא שמי רבה.
Amen.
יעמד יברכרתי וימליך מלכותי וחייכונה וימיכונה וחיידך בישראל בגלה בזמן קריב ואמרו.
אמן.
יהי שמי רבה מורח למעלה יתברך. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה. בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו.
Amen.
תקבל צלת הון ובהון לכל ישראל קדם ובהון ושמי ואמרו.
אמן.
יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו.
Amen.
עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו. אמן.
Amen. Yasher Koach to Susan for leading us in Musaf, and a Yasher Koach to everybody who participated this morning in our service. To Steve for leading Shachrit, to Joe and Susan for reading Torah, to Rachel for doing the blessing for the new month, to Art for reading the Haftarah, and to everybody for coming and joining with us this morning, whether you're joining by live stream or in person. The congregation wishes a mazel tov to Following individuals who are celebrating their birthday this week: Andrew Francisco, Harvey Mendelson, Samuel Bell, Susan Axelrod, Eileen Wolf Fine, and Jeffrey Handelman. And to these folks who are celebrating their anniversaries: Eric and Josh Cooper Ginsburg, Roberta and Stephen Burke, Abra and Eric Kaufman, David and Amy Posner, and Kara and Carl Korn. Happy anniversary to all of you. We are happy and joyful to celebrate with you whatever the special occasion is that you are celebrating, and we hope to celebrate many special occasions with you as we go forward. We continue now with Aleinu, page 510. Please rise.
Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol, latev gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu kigoye haratzot, v'lo samanu kimishpachot adama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim, v'mishtachavim modim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu, shehu notei shamayim v'yosed haaretz, u'moshe v'yikaro b'shamayim imal, u'shchinatu zo, v'gav hemiromim, hu Eloheinu enod, emem alkeinu efes ulato, kakatu v'torato, v'yadat hayom v'hashavota elevavecha, ki Adonai hu ha'Elohim, b'shamayim imal, v'al haaretz mitachat enod. Kakatu b'toratecha, Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed, v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai le'melech al kol haaretz, b'yom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad.
Congregation honors the memories of the following individuals who have gone to their eternal rest: Paul Fraster, Joel Lindy, Asher Arthur Lowenthal, Lillian Myers, Abraham Pletman, Daniel Strickman, Joel Lewin, Michael Bellick, Sarah Cohen, Annette Hirschenhorn, Berna Sevitz, Joseph Spiegel, Bernard Wigler, Frida Anixtein, Philip Kozen, Doris Brown Pletman, Connie Garmill, Albert Gross, and Robert Siegel. In solemn testimony to the unbroken chain of faith which links one generation of the house of Israel to the next, those who mourn and those who are observing Yartzeit now rise to magnify and sanctify God's name with the words of Kaddish Avelim, Mourner's Kaddish, page 512. Yitkadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah, Ve'alma Difra Kirutei, Ve'amlich Malchutei, V'chayechon U'gyomechon U'chaye Dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'gala U'vizman Kariv V'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'alam Elamei Almayah. Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpahar V'yitromam V'yitnasei V'tadar, v'talev, v'talal, shmei dekudesha, brichu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom imromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. I'm going to invite Steve to offer some announcements on behalf of the Board of Trustees.
Good Shabbos, everybody. Havdalah at 9:12 tonight. We have a number of classes that are coming up in the community. Rabbi Spitzer continues with the second session of our Back to the Basics Living a Jewish Life. That's on Thursday at 7:30. The first of Jonathan Weil's course, Tanakh, a Tanakh Tour de Force, is on Wednesday at 1 o'clock. And we also have coming up on Monday the 14th, KB Goodfin Federation is going to do a talk on Jews and tattoos at 7:30. That's not Monday coming, but Monday after the 14th. There's also quite a few online programs. You can go to our website and you can get a full list and links. There's more than I can read, but there's, among others, there's one from Hazon, which I want to mention in connection to the sermon today. And that is pretty much where we are. Quick announcement, we are still putting details together, but we hope that Friday night services next Friday, the coming Friday, which I guess is the 11th, will be outdoors in the parking lot. Stay tuned for further announcements about that and hope for good weather. Shabbos.
Follow up, just wanted to invite everybody to stop by the Rabbinage anytime next Saturday afternoon between 3 and 5 p.m. for an outdoor social gathering. Come for a little while, say hi to the other congregants who are stopping by, have some refreshments, some cookies, and enjoy the celebration of summer with us. That's next Saturday afternoon, Shabbat afternoon, from 3 to 5. Rachel and our family and I are very excited to welcome you all to join us at outside the Rabbinage. We conclude our service with Adon Olam, page 514.
Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yitzir nivra li'ed nasa b'chefsa kol Azai melech shemo nikra v'yahare kichlot hakol levado yimloch nora v'hu haya v'hu hoveh v'hu yiyeh v'tifara v'hu echad v'ein sheni Laham Shilo, Lahachira, Veli Reshit, Veli Tachlit, Velo Haos, Veham Yisra, Vehu Eli, Vechai Goali, Vitzor Hevli, Vietzara, Vehu Nisi, Umanosli, Menat kosi biyom ekra biyado afkid ruchi b'tishan b'ayira b'yim ruchi geviyati Adonai li v'lo ira.
Shabbat shalom. Scientific term for water bears. Okay. They just brought them to the space station. What? Tardigrades.
I think we can walk with you. Tardigrades. Okay.
Yes, they are tardigrades. Tardigrades are also called water bears.
Okay. Yeah, I heard of one of the studies.
They are very resilient little creatures.
And so the proteins are really, really cool because they are very, very resilient.
Yeah. Sasha, go.
See, I have a summer tally and I have a winter one. This is my summer one. This is actually my fault.
Nice.